Hi guys, today I wanted to share with you a portion of the new online course that I created for Udemy. This is the second course in a series of 3, and it is the Foundations in Anatomy and Body Science for Yoga Teachers series. This series encompasses the 30 hours of training that I usually put into a 200-hour teacher training for Yoga Alliance. But I wanted to make this available online because I feel like a lot of yoga teachers who go through teacher training don't feel like they got what they needed out of the anatomy portion. So I've put together a series of lectures and practices that will really help you to understand the most important concepts in anatomy and physiology for yoga teachers. This second course focuses on muscle function, and it's all about making sure that you understand the information that you're going to need so that when you go on to study the names of the muscles and what the muscles do, that information is going to make a lot more sense. So I hope you enjoy this section. In this section of movement exploration, we're going to talk about some of the functional movements that I like to pull into my yoga classes. And we're focusing on that definition of functional as a movement that has a practical or useful application. So this is something that we don't just do on our yoga mats, but they're movements that we see used in our daily life to pick things up, to get on and off a chair, to carry something, to reach for something. These are movement patterns that you're going to see and use in your daily life. So they're things that our students need to be good at. And I'm going to talk about the reasoning behind why I like to pull in each of these different specific movements. But we'll start with one of my favorite ones, which is chair pose. And I like chair pose because in my work as an occupational therapist, one of the first things that I evaluate when I'm working with a client who has maybe balance challenges or has some lower body weakness is I want to see how well they sit down into a chair with control and how easily they can stand up out of a chair without having to push with their arms. So it lets me see how much leg strength and stability they have for that functional movement of getting out of a chair, getting out of their car, or very importantly, getting off their toilet seat. So something that we all have to do several times a day, right? Chair pose. So in yoga, doing this pose of bending the knee and bending the hip and holding, working on creating control here, but I'll also add some little lower down with control and then push up. Lower down and push up. Because then we're mimicking that movement of how we control our sit. We don't want to do what I call plopping, which is just dropping your butt into a chair, which means that you're not using your eccentric control when you sit, and having enough strength in your legs to push to come up onto your feet. So chair pose and doing some dynamic up and down movements in chair pose is a great functional movement that you can work into your yoga practice. The other one is a deep squat. And this is really going to depend on knees and backs and things like that, but say you're working with somebody that's overall pretty healthy and can tolerate extreme knee flexion. A deep squat is something that is a very functional movement, and I actually use this movement a lot during the day to do things that are on the floor or to reach down to pick something up. If I was going to pick something up like this block, I might come down into a nice deep squat. We think of this as malasana or garland pose, but when you're staying up on your toes, you're a little bit more dynamic and you can shift your weight around and you can turn this way and you can turn that way to get things that you might be reaching for in your garage or underneath your cabinets like this if I needed to get something out. So working on your squatting, or what we can call a half squat or a half kneel, where we have one leg up and one leg down so that I can get access to this. And this is a very nice thing to work into some different transitions in your yoga poses But again, making sure that you have students whose knees can tolerate those sort of transitions. Okay, so from here, I'll talk to you about the next one, which is the golfer's lift. So the golfer's lift is another thing that I will frequently teach my patients in the therapy clinic as a way to pick things up that is really good for working on your balance, but it's also a way to keep your back happy when you're bending over. And if you ever watch professional golf, this is how golfers bend over to pick up the ball, because if they did a straight leg bend multiple times a day, there's a chance that their back could get irritated. Not that we shouldn't bend over like this. This is totally fine for picking up nice light things like yoga blocks and golf balls, but another option, I do this all the time without even thinking about it. If there's something that I want to lift or pick up, I will kick my other leg back as I pick it up. It's a very nice dynamic weight shift, and it feels very nice on my back compared to this. So try that single leg lift. Kick one leg back. This is my counterweight, and then I just come down to pick it up. Now, in the traditional golfer's lift, they will have their golf club in the other hand for stability. I'll usually have my patients do this next to a counter so that they have a balance point there, because it can be a rather tricky balance because you're standing on one leg. So traditionally, you're supposed to have support from some sort of external object. All right, so the next one is the forward fold. I'm not saying that forward folding is bad for your back, but for some people, depending on their medical history, bending over with their legs straight might not feel great. But in daily life, the fact of the matter is that we do it, right? So it's something that we want to work on. And of course, we know in yoga, we tend to spend a lot of time in that position. And you can do all of your tricks of playing with your knee position and your sitting bone position depending on your hamstrings and all sorts of things like that. And helping your students to explore some of those movements. So we try to take away the fear of movements. We're working on taking away the fear that we always have to have the knee right over the ankle. Sometimes the knee might be behind the ankle when we're doing posterior chain strength. Sometimes the knee might be in front of the ankle when we're working on that good end range ankle dorsiflexion. So we want to help our students to get out of those fear patterns if their body is ready for it, using that progressive loading or progressive exposure as a way to help them make friends with movements that they might have been nervous or fearful of in the past. And you're opening up their movement repertoire as you do that. So the next one that I want to talk about is going to be getting on and off the floor. For some of your students, this might not be a problem at all, but if you've ever taught a class for people who have movement disorders or balance disorders, or people who are a little bit older, getting on and off the floor could be something that they avoid at all costs, because again, there's a fear factor. For many of my patients who have Parkinson's disease, they will say, okay, I'll go on the floor, but I might not get back up. And I say, don't worry, I will show you how to do it. So if you're teaching a class, especially for seniors or for people who are at a risk of falling, teaching them how to get back up can be tremendously helpful to them. So if they do ever find themselves on the floor, playing with their grandchildren or doing something like gardening where they have to get down low, they will have the movement strategies to know how to safely get back up into standing, whether that is using a prop or a chair or a counter, or doing it without any external support. So the first one that I like to kind of play around with, if people have pretty good knees, is just the simple stand up and down with the legs crossed. Very interesting way to explore hip range of motion. Make sure you switch. Like that. And then we can go to another version of that, maybe with blocks. So from sitting on the floor, and I should mention, sitting comfortably on the floor is another position that I like to work on, because again, even if you're older, you might have grandchildren who you want to get on the floor with, or pets that you want to get on the floor with. I'm surprised Redford is staying on the couch right now because I'm on the floor. He'll usually run over and try to lick me. All right. So from that sitting position, you're going to help them to roll over into prone and then find some sort of support. It might be blocks, it might be the surface of a chair, it might be a countertop. And then you're going to step a foot forward, and you're going to use your leverage of your props to start to lift the back knee up, and then step it forward and come up into standing. And then to get down onto the floor, the same thing in reverse. You're going to use your props to lower yourself down, bring that leg back, roll toward one side, and then spin the legs out in front, or whatever position they might be comfortable sitting on the floor. Of course, through that transition, I might use cushions underneath the knees. I might use surfaces that are higher or lower. Sitting on the floor, if the person is not accustomed to sitting on the floor, I'm going to give them a big, thick cushion to sit on, and then gradually start to decrease the height of that cushion. But I like to keep access to getting on and off the floor, because the floor is a great place to explore movement. And sitting on the floor is an excellent way to keep our hip mobility and flexibility. So different positions of sitting on the floor, like Z-sitting, cross-legged sitting, maybe kneeling, all of those different things can help people get access to lower surfaces when they are trying to pick things up or trying to clean different areas or weed their garden or anything like that. So since we're down on the floor, I'll talk about our next one, which is rolling. And it might seem like such a simple thing, but again, when I work with people who have movement disorders or vestibular disorders, this can be a very tricky topic. Now, if you're working with somebody who has a history of vertigo, extreme caution needs to be exercised with rolling and changing orientation to gravity. So keep that in mind for sure when you're changing positions. That's something that can flare up somebody if they have vertigo. But for people who are not having issues with vertigo and dizziness, we want to work on rolling, because it's a form of weight shifting, but it's also the way that we roll over in bed. And it actually has a lot to do with our understanding and our use of our core muscles. So doing different sort of segmental rolling, where we kind of straighten one leg and roll over onto the belly, and then roll onto the back, are very helpful. And that brings me to my next thing, which I tell a lot of my patients at least once a day: get down on the floor, stretch your body out, and just focus on your breathing. So breathing by itself is a functional part of yoga. And in Donna Farhi's book, The Breathing Book, she talks about how it's not all about pranayama. It's not all about controlled, restricted ranges of motion for our breath or ratios for our breath. One of the most important things we can help people with is understanding free, natural breathing. Just allowing your body to expand and contract in a very natural, soft way that feels like it resets the rhythm of the body. And while we're working on that very functional, very important method of natural free breathing, the body is resting against the floor and finding a very natural alignment, finding a very straight line without gravity pulling it forward. Our shoulders get to drop back, our head gets to relax back. So spending time on the floor for just a couple of minutes, relaxing into that support, letting your breath be free, and allowing your body to be still can be one of the most beneficial and functional parts of your day. So now I'm going to use my rolling to come up and over onto the belly. Going onto the belly is another thing that I like to incorporate into my classes, and sometimes I get a little bit of resistance, especially for people who are a little bit older. Sometimes they haven't been on their stomach in many years in some cases, so there can be some fear of being in a prone position. But the reason I like to work on this is from a developmental standpoint. When we get head and neck control as a baby to be on our stomach and lift our head up, this is really when we're developing our neck arch, which is important for our neck strength. So if I can sit here and read a book, or sometimes I'll go on my laptop like this, or I'll put my phone here, I am emphasizing the natural arch in the back of my neck and the natural arch in my lower back. I'm also in a position that is very opposite of sitting in a chair. And one of the reasons I do this personally for me is because supporting myself up on my elbows helps to create more strength and stability around my shoulder blades, because I can only stay here for so long before my shoulders start to get tired and I'll sink down and I'll go, okay, time to switch and change to a new position, which is fine. In the beginning, you might only be able to stay here for a couple of minutes, and after you work on it for a while, you might be here for 15 or 20 minutes before you feel like you need to change position. But it's actually a really good place to be able to read and get some work done that is not sitting, because we're always trying to break up those sitting patterns. All right, so the last piece of functional movement that I'm going to share with you is weight shifting. So in yoga, we are pretty good at working on balance, but I think we overemphasize what is called static balance. Think of like standing on one foot. And we underemphasize dynamic balance, which is weight shifting front to back or side to side, because dynamic balance is what we actually use during the day. When you're reaching to pick something up, when you're bending over to pick something up, when you turn to look behind you, those are forms of dynamic balance. We hardly ever stand on one foot and hold and try to stay as still as possible during the day. I can't really think of any time that you would have to do that in normal daily movement. But dynamic balance is something that you're doing all the time. So let's look at the two different forms of weight shifting: front and back and side to side. So front to back weight shifting, I like to do this example of reaching the arms forward, and you can see I come up onto my toe, so all of my weight comes forward, and then reaching my arms back. It's a little bit of a challenge. Front and back. Front and back. And there's a lot of different ways that you could integrate this into your practice. This is just one example of front to back weight shifting. And then I could lift a little bit more. All right, and then let's do a side to side weight shift. I love the side to side movements. But as I lift up that toe, all of my weight, or almost all of my weight, goes to this side. Side to side weight shifting. And then maybe working on a little bit of a low squat. And then shifting. All right, so those are a lot of the functional movements and positions that I like to work into my yoga practice. The last one is reaching overhead, and seems like something we do a lot in yoga, right? We do a lot of arms up over the head, and it's something that I feel like is very helpful to work on, because reaching and getting something off of a shelf, or going up into your closet and getting something that's up on a hanger, or something that's on the top shelf in the cupboards, is a really common thing that we all have to do. So if our shoulders are tight or weak and we don't have very good overhead reach, that's something that could impact how well we are able to access the things that are in our house and the things in the environment around us. So working on overhead reaching and increasing range of motion for those of us that have maybe some shoulder limitations can be something that's really helpful during the day. All right, so there's your set of functional movements, and you can start to think about how you can integrate those sort of things into your normal yoga practice or your teaching. Thanks for watching this segment of my new anatomy course. I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to be giving away access to the first and the second course in the Foundations of Anatomy series, and I'm going to be pulling a name on October 20th. So anytime between now and October 20th, if you can leave a comment below this video and let me know why you would like to take that course, how you think it would be helpful to you as a yoga teacher. And you can go over to my Instagram, which is @LauraGYoga, and leave a comment on there, or send me a direct message, and I'll put your name in the drawing to win part 1 and part 2 of Foundations in Anatomy. So that's a total of 18 hours of lecture and practice information.